The night my grandfather died, my father tried to burn an envelope in our kitchen sink. I wasn't supposed to see it. But I did. And the look on his face told me everything. Whatever was inside the envelope was something he never wanted me to know. It started at 2:13 in the morning. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, dragging me out of sleep. The screen lit up with my mother's name. When I answered, her voice sounded strangely calm. "Ethan, your grandfather passed away." For a moment I just stared at the ceiling. Grandpa Harold had been sick for months, but somehow I thought he would last forever. He was one of those stubborn men who looked like they'd survive a nuclear apocalypse out of pure spite. "When?" I asked. "About an hour ago." I rubbed my face and sat up. "I'll drive over." Our family house was only 15 minutes away. My parents had moved in with Grandpa 2 years earlier to help take care of him, though if you asked Grandpa, he'd say they mostly helped themselves to his money. Still, I grabbed my jacket and drove through the empty streets toward the house where I'd grown up. The porch lights were on when I arrived. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and something burnt. My mother sat at the dining table with red eyes and a tissue in her hand. My father stood near the kitchen counter, pacing like he was waiting for something. They both looked up when I walked in. "Ethan," Mom said softly. She stood up and hugged me, but it felt strange. Not grief. Something else. Nervous. My father barely looked at me. "Your grandfather passed peacefully," he said quickly. "Where is he now?" I asked. "The hospital took him," Mom replied. That didn't make sense. Grandpa had a nurse visiting daily. Usually, in situations like this, the hospital wouldn't take the body immediately. But before I could question it, I noticed something odd. The kitchen sink was blackened. Like something had been burned there. My father suddenly stepped in front of the counter, blocking my view. "You want coffee?" he asked. That was when I knew something wasn't right. My father never offered coffee to anyone. Especially not at 2 in the morning. "I'm good," I said slowly. Then I heard a knock on the door. All three of us froze. My parents exchanged a quick look. Dad walked over and opened it. Standing on the porch was a tall man in a gray coat, holding a leather briefcase. "Good evening," he said. "I'm Daniel Mercer. Your father's attorney. Grandpa's lawyer." Dad forced a smile. "Mr. Mercer, we weren't expecting you tonight." "I understand," Mercer said calmly. "But your father insisted I come immediately after his passing." My parents looked confused. "Insisted?" Mom asked. Mercer nodded and stepped inside. "Yes." Harold left very specific instructions. He placed the briefcase on the table and slowly opened it. My father's jaw tightened. "Look," Dad said, "tonight probably isn't the best." Mercer raised a hand. "I'm afraid it has to be tonight." The room went silent. Then he pulled out 2 envelopes. One was thin. The other was thick and sealed with a red wax stamp. My stomach twisted. Something about the envelopes felt heavy. Like they carried more than just paper. Mercer placed the thin one on the table first. "This is the official will," he said. Mom let out a breath of relief. Of course. The will. Grandpa had a lot of assets, the house, his savings, his antique collection. Dad reached for the envelope. But Mercer stopped him. "There's also this." He placed the second envelope on the table. The one with the red wax seal. "This one is addressed to Ethan." The room went completely still. Me? I asked. Mercer nodded. Your grandfather told me to give this to you personally. Only after his passing. Dad's face turned pale. That doesn't make sense, he said quickly. But Mercer simply slid the envelope toward me. Your grandfather said the truth should come from him. My heart started pounding. I picked up the envelope. The wax seal had Grandpa's initials pressed into it, HR. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke it open. Inside was a letter. And a photograph. The photograph fell onto the table. Mom gasped. Dad knocked his chair backward as he stood up. Because the picture showed something none of us expected. It was a photo of my father. Standing outside a bank. Holding a briefcase. Next to a man in a suit. On the back of the photo were 4 handwritten words. The day he stole it. My father lunged forward. Give me that! But Mercer stepped between us. Sit down, Mr. Carter. My father froze. Your father anticipated this reaction. Dad's voice shook with anger. You don't know what you're doing. Mercer calmly opened the thin envelope. I believe I do. He pulled out the will and began reading. But I barely heard the words. Because the letter in my hand started with a sentence that made my blood run cold. Ethan, if you are reading this, it means your father tried to destroy the truth. My eyes slowly lifted toward my dad. And for the first time in my life, he looked afraid of me. My hands felt cold as I unfolded the letter. The room was completely silent except for the ticking of the wall clock behind me. My father hadn't sat back down. He stood near the table like a man waiting for a bomb to explode. Ethan, he said carefully, you don't need to read that tonight. My mother nodded quickly. Yes, honey. You're upset. Maybe tomorrow. Let him read it, Mercer interrupted calmly. My father shot him a furious look. I took a slow breath and began reading. Ethan. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, I'm gone. Second, your father tried to stop this letter from reaching you. I felt every pair of eyes in the room on me. My father shifted his weight. Your grandfather was confused near the end, he said. You know how old people get. But Mercer simply leaned back in his chair. Continue. I read the next line. 23 years ago, something happened that your parents never told you. Something that changed this family forever. My throat tightened. I glanced at my dad. He looked tense. Not sad. Not grieving. Just tense. I kept reading. At the time, I owned a small investment firm with my business partner, Samuel Vance. We weren't rich yet, but we were close. One deal would have made us both millionaires. I could hear my father breathing faster. The money from that deal was placed in a temporary holding account at Westbrook Bank. $5 million. My mother gasped softly. I looked up. 5 million? Mercer nodded. Your grandfather was very successful. I looked back at the letter. The morning the money was supposed to be transferred, it disappeared. Every dollar. I felt my stomach drop. The bank security cameras showed only one person entering the private office where the transfer codes were stored. My hands started shaking. Because I already knew what the next line would say. Your father. The word hung in the air like thunder. No, Mom whispered. Dad slammed his hand on the table. That's not true. Mercer didn't react. Finish the letter, he said. I swallowed hard and continued. When the money vanished, Samuel accused me of stealing it. The police investigated, but the trail had been covered perfectly. No proof. No arrests. But I knew the truth. I slowly looked up again. Dad's face was pale. Sweat glistened on his forehead. Your father begged me not to report him. He said he'd made a mistake. That he'd return the money. My chest tightened. But the money never came back. My mother shook her head. This is ridiculous, she said weakly. Harold must have misunderstood something. Mercer calmly folded his hands. Please continue. I read the next part quietly. Instead, Samuel lost everything. His reputation. His company. His home. And 6 months later, he took his own life. The room fell into a deep silence. Even the clock seemed louder now. Tick. 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 My eyes moved slowly to my father. Dad. His jaw tightened. That's not what happened. I looked back down at the letter. For years, I kept quiet. You were just a child, Ethan. And I believed your father would eventually fix what he'd done. My chest hurt as I kept reading. Instead, he and your mother slowly started moving into my life. My mother froze. First it was helping with bills. Then managing my finances. Then convincing me I was too old to handle things alone. Dad's voice was sharp now. Stop reading. But I couldn't stop. Not now. 2 years ago, they moved into my house. They said it was to take care of me. But Ethan. I believe they were waiting for me to die. My heart was racing. I felt like the room was closing in. Then I reached the last paragraph. And it made everything worse. If you're holding this letter, it means they tried to stop the truth from reaching you. Which means the second envelope is now in play. I looked up. The second envelope? Mercer nodded slowly. Yes. My father suddenly stepped forward. No. But Mercer had already opened his briefcase again. He pulled out a third envelope. Thicker. Much thicker. My father's voice cracked. You can't do that. Mercer looked at him calmly. Your father was very clear. He slid the envelope across the table. Toward me. This one contains the evidence he spent 20 years collecting. The room felt like it had lost all oxygen. What kind of evidence? I asked. Mercer answered quietly. Bank records. Transfer logs. Property purchases. My stomach dropped. Purchases? Mercer nodded. Yes. He tapped the envelope. Properties bought with the stolen money. My mother slowly sat down. No, that's impossible. But Mercer's next words shattered the room. Your father didn't steal $5 million. He looked directly at me. He stole $23 million. My heart nearly stopped. Dad suddenly rushed forward. Enough. He grabbed the envelope from the table. But Mercer stood instantly. You might want to think carefully before opening that. Dad froze. Why? Mercer adjusted his glasses. Because the first page is a confession. The silence that followed felt endless. Then Mercer added one final sentence. and it made my father's hands start shaking. My father's hand froze in the air. The thick envelope was halfway open. Mercer's words hung in the room like a threat. The first page is a confession, signed by you. For several seconds nobody moved. My mother looked back and forth between my father and the lawyer like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. "Daniel," she said quietly, "this has gone far enough." But Mercer didn't even glance at her. His eyes stayed locked on my father. "Open it," he said calmly. Dad's jaw tightened. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" The envelope crinkled in my father's grip. Then he slowly pulled out the papers. There were dozens of them. Bank documents. Printed emails. Legal forms. But the first page was different. It looked older. Yellowed slightly with time. My father stared at it. And for the first time in my entire life, I saw him look truly afraid. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he suddenly tried to shove the paper back into the envelope. Mercer stepped forward. "Let Ethan see it." "No." The word came out sharp. Too sharp. I stood up. "Dad, what is it?" My father looked at me. For a moment I thought he might lie. But then he did something worse. He said nothing. That silence told me everything. Mercer gently took the paper from his hand and slid it across the table to me. "Your grandfather had this document authenticated 2 years ago." I looked down. At the bottom of the page was a signature. My father's signature. Above it were words that made my chest tighten. Confidential agreement. The paragraph beneath it read, "I, Thomas Carter, acknowledge my involvement in the unauthorized transfer of funds from Westbrook Holdings on June 14, 2003. My hands began to shake. And agree to repay the amount within 5 years in exchange for the matter remaining private." 5 years. But 23 years had passed. I slowly looked up. "Dad." His face was pale. "You don't understand." "Then explain." He rubbed his face like a man who had been cornered. "It wasn't like that." Mercer leaned against the table. "Then what was it like?" My father glared at him. "You weren't there." Mercer shrugged slightly. "No. But Harold was." My father turned back to me. "Your grandfather forced me to sign that." "Why?" "He wanted control." The words sounded weak. Even he knew it. Mercer opened the envelope again and pulled out another document. This is where the story becomes interesting. He handed me a sheet filled with bank records. Transfers. Dates. Account numbers. At the top of the page was a total amount. $23,417,000. I stared at it. "That's impossible." My father laughed nervously. "Exactly." But Mercer pointed to a column on the page. These properties were purchased over a 20-year period. He slid another sheet toward me. It was a list. Houses. Apartments. Commercial buildings. All under different company names. "Shell corporations," Mercer explained. I looked at my dad again. "Are these yours?" My mother suddenly stood up. "No." The word came out too quickly. Dad looked at her. And in that moment, something strange passed between them. Fear. But not the same kind. Different. Unequal. Linda, Dad said quietly. But she shook her head. No. You promised. The room went silent. I frowned. Promised what? My mother's eyes filled with tears. You weren't supposed to find out like this. My stomach twisted. Find out what? She slowly sat down again. Then she whispered something that made the air feel heavier. The houses aren't his. I blinked. What? Mercer raised an eyebrow. My father closed his eyes. Like a man who knew the next few seconds would destroy everything. My mother looked at me. They're mine. The words felt unreal. You bought them? She shook her head. No. Her voice trembled. He did. She pointed at my father. But not for himself. My mind was spinning. Then why? She took a shaky breath. Because someone was blackmailing him. Mercer straightened slightly. Blackmail? My father slammed his hand on the table again. Stop talking. But my mother didn't stop. He started getting letters 10 years ago. My heart started racing. What kind of letters? She looked at the envelope full of evidence. From someone who knew about the stolen money. Mercer frowned. That's interesting. Dad glared at him. You knew about this? Mercer shook his head. No. Then he asked the question none of us expected. Did Harold know? My father didn't answer. My mother slowly nodded. Yes. Mercer's expression changed. That complicates things. I felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. Who was blackmailing you? My father's hands were trembling now. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he whispered something so quietly I almost didn't hear it. Samuel's son. My breath caught. The man whose father died? Dad nodded. He found the truth. Mercer leaned forward. And he's been collecting payments ever since? My father laughed bitterly. Not payments. He looked at the stack of property documents. Assets. My heart was pounding. So all those houses were supposed to go to him. The room fell silent again. But Mercer slowly shook his head. That's the strange part. Dad frowned. What do you mean? Mercer tapped the envelope. Because according to Harold's final will. He paused. And looked directly at me. Every single one of those properties now belongs to Ethan. My mother gasped. My father stared at him. What? Mercer calmly pulled another document from the briefcase. The updated will was signed 3 weeks ago. My hands felt numb. You're saying? Mercer nodded. Yes. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. You just inherited $23 million. But my father didn't look shocked. He looked terrified. Because he knew something the rest of us didn't. And when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Samuel's son isn't going to let that happen. The room was silent after my father's words. Samuel's son isn't going to let that happen. I felt a chill run through me. What do you mean? I asked. My father didn't answer immediately. He stared at the documents on the table like they were a ticking clock. He's been waiting for years, he finally said. For what? For leverage. Mercer folded his hands calmly. And now he's lost it. Dad laughed bitterly. You don't understand the kind of man he is. Before Mercer could reply, knock. The sound was sharp, loud, and it came from the front door. Every head in the room turned at once. My mother's face drained of color. My father whispered something under his breath. No, no, no. The knock came again. 3 slow taps. Mercer glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:47 a.m. Are you expecting someone? He asked. No one answered. The knocking came a third time. Slower. Heavier. I stood up. I'll get it. My father grabbed my arm. No. His grip was tight. Too tight. You don't open that door. I pulled my arm away. Why? He looked like he was trying to think of a lie. But none came. So I walked toward the door. Behind me I could hear my mother whispering urgently to my father. You said he didn't know about tonight. I didn't tell him, Dad whispered back. My hand reached the doorknob. And suddenly I felt something strange in my chest. Like the house itself was holding its breath. I opened the door. A tall man stood on the porch. Mid-30s. Dark coat. Sharp eyes. He looked calm. Too calm. Behind him, rain had started falling softly on the driveway. Good evening, he said. Then he looked directly at me. You must be Ethan. My stomach dropped. Yes. He gave a small nod. I'm glad you're here. My father's voice came from behind me. Close the door. The man smiled slightly. Hello, Thomas. Dad stepped into the hallway. His face was white. You shouldn't be here. The man shrugged. I disagree. He stepped inside without waiting for permission. The smell of rain followed him. Mercer stood from the table when he saw the stranger. And you are? The lawyer asked. The man took off his coat slowly. My name is Adrian Vance. My chest tightened. Samuel Vance's son. The man my father had just warned us about. Adrian glanced at the table. At the envelopes. At the documents. Then he smiled. Well, he said. Looks like I'm right on time. My father's voice was shaking now. How did you know he died tonight? Adrian tilted his head. Because I've been watching this house for 3 days. My mother gasped. You've been spying on us? Adrian looked at her calmly. I prefer the word waiting. Mercer stepped forward. Mr. Vance, this is a private legal matter. Adrian laughed softly. Oh, I know exactly what it is. He walked to the table and picked up one of the property lists. Harold finally told the truth, didn't he? No one spoke. Adrian placed the paper back down. Then his eyes moved to me. And you're the new owner of my assets. I frowned. Your assets? He smiled again. Yes. He leaned against the chair casually. Your father made a deal with me 10 years ago. My father shouted suddenly. Under blackmail. Adrian shrugged. Semantics. My heart was pounding. You forced him to give you those properties? Adrian looked at me. I gave him a choice. And what was the other option? Prison. The word echoed through the room. My father looked furious. You ruined my life. Adrian's smile disappeared. Your choices ruined your life. The two men stared at each other. Years of anger between them. Mercer cleared his throat. Well, regardless of your previous arrangement. He tapped the will document. Legally speaking, those properties now belong to Ethan. Adrian looked at the paper. Then he started laughing. Not loudly. But the sound was cold. You think Harold didn't know about our deal? Mercer paused. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. The room went quiet again. What's that? I asked. Adrian held it up. A recording. My father's face went pale. No. Adrian placed the drive on the table. 3 weeks ago, I visited Harold. Mercer frowned. That's impossible. Harold was barely seeing anyone. Adrian shrugged. He saw me. My heart was racing. What's on the recording? Adrian looked at me. A conversation. With my grandfather? He nodded. And in that conversation, Adrian's voice became colder. Harold admits something very interesting. My father whispered. Don't play it. Adrian ignored him. Mercer pulled a laptop from his briefcase. You have a copy? Adrian nodded. Of course. Mercer inserted the drive. For a moment the only sound was the rain hitting the windows. Then a voice filled the room. Old. Weak. But unmistakable. My grandfather. Adrian. I'm glad you came. My chest tightened. Grandpa sounded tired. Adrian's voice came from the speakers. You know why I'm here. A pause. Then Grandpa sighed. Yes. Another pause. And then the sentence that froze everyone in the room. Because your father didn't kill himself. My head snapped up. What? The recording continued. Adrian's voice was sharp now. Then who did? There was a long silence. And then my grandfather said something that made my blood run cold. Thomas did. The room exploded with noise. My mother screamed. My father knocked his chair over. That's a lie. But the recording wasn't finished. Grandpa's voice returned. Weak. Heavy with guilt. It was an accident, but it was still his fault. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I slowly turned toward my father. His eyes were wide. Panicked. And for the first time that night, he looked completely broken. But Adrian wasn't finished. He leaned closer to the table and said quietly, Now you understand why the money never mattered. I swallowed hard. Then what does? Adrian looked directly at my father. And answered with one word. The word justice hung in the air like a blade. No one moved. The rain outside had grown heavier, tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. My father looked like he might collapse. That recording is manipulated, he said hoarsely. Harold was sick. He didn't know what he was saying. Adrian didn't even look at him. Instead, he watched me. You want to know what really happened to my father? He asked. My chest felt tight. Yes. My father stepped forward suddenly. No. This is over. But Mercer raised a hand. I'm afraid it isn't. My father glared at him. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Mercer's expression didn't change. I'm interested in the truth. Adrian leaned against the table. The truth, he said softly, is in this house. I frowned. What do you mean? He nodded toward the hallway. Your grandfather kept records of everything. Dad shook his head quickly. No, he didn't. Adrian smiled faintly. Yes, he did. He pointed toward the floor. Specifically, downstairs. My stomach tightened. The basement? Adrian nodded. My father suddenly walked toward the stairs leading down. No one is going down there. But Mercer stood in his path. Mr. Carter, if there are documents relevant to the will, they need to be reviewed. Dad's hands were shaking now. You don't understand. Adrian spoke quietly. Oh, I think we do. Then he looked at me. Ethan, have you ever been in your grandfather's basement office? I shook my head. No. Grandpa had always kept it locked. When I was a kid, he'd tell me it was full of boring paperwork. Nothing interesting. Adrian smiled slightly. That's what he told everyone. My father looked desperate now. There's nothing down there. Adrian tilted his head. Then you won't mind if we check. For several seconds my father didn't move. Then slowly, he stepped aside. We walked down the narrow basement stairs together. The air grew cooler with every step. At the bottom was a heavy wooden door. The same one I'd seen my whole life. Always locked. Adrian looked at me. Go ahead. I grabbed the handle. It turned easily. Unlocked. That alone sent a chill through me. The door creaked open. Inside was a small office. Dusty shelves. Old filing cabinets. A desk lamp. And a wall covered in photographs. My breath caught. Dozens of photos. Some of them were of my father. Others showed bank buildings. Parking lots. People meeting in secret. Mercer stepped closer. My God. Adrian walked slowly toward the wall. Harold was building a case. My father appeared in the doorway behind us. You're twisting everything. But no one was listening. Because on the desk sat a thick black notebook. Adrian picked it up carefully. This is what I came for. Mercer adjusted his glasses. May I? Adrian handed it to him. Mercer flipped through the pages. Every page was full of writing. Dates. Notes. Transactions. Evidence. Harold documented everything, Mercer murmured. I stepped closer. What does it say? Mercer looked up. Your grandfather believed Samuel's death wasn't a suicide. My father laughed nervously. Of course he did. He blamed me for everything. But Mercer kept reading. Then he stopped. His expression changed. What? I asked. He turned the notebook toward me. On the page was a handwritten entry. Dated June 18, 2003. For days after the money disappeared. The words were shaky. But clear. Thomas came to the office tonight. Samuel confronted him about the missing money. They argued. Samuel fell. My heart started racing. Fell? Mercer read the next line slowly. He hit the desk corner. There was blood everywhere. The basement felt suddenly colder. My father's voice cracked behind me. That's not what happened. Mercer continued reading. Thomas panicked. He said it was an accident. He begged me not to call the police. My hands were trembling now. What did Grandpa do? Mercer flipped the page. And read the final sentence. We staged it. The words echoed in the room. My father covered his face. No. Mercer finished reading. We made it look like suicide. The silence that followed felt endless. I slowly turned around. Dad. He didn't look at me. Instead, he whispered something I never expected to hear. I didn't mean to kill him. My stomach dropped. Adrian's jaw tightened. So it's true. Dad shook his head desperately. It was an accident. He looked at me now. Ethan, you have to believe me. But I could barely hear him. Because my mind was racing through the pieces. The money. The blackmail. The will. The recordings. Then something else caught my eye. A small metal box under the desk. I pointed to it. What's that? Adrian crouched and pulled it out. Locked. But there was a key taped to the bottom. He opened it slowly. Inside were several old cassette tapes. Mercer picked one up. Labeled recordings. My heart pounded. Recordings of what? Adrian turned one tape over. The label read, Thomas, Confession, 2004. My father's eyes widened. No. Mercer looked up. This could change everything. Adrian nodded slowly. Yes. Then he looked directly at my father. And said the sentence that made the room go silent again. The basement felt smaller now. Like the walls were slowly closing in. Adrian held the cassette tape between his fingers. The label read, Thomas, Confession, 2004. My father looked like he had seen a ghost. You can't play that, he said. Mercer glanced at him. Why not? Dad shook his head. It's private. Adrian laughed quietly. A confession about killing my father is not private. My heart pounded. Play it. My voice surprised even me. Everyone looked at me. I swallowed hard. I need to know. Mercer nodded slowly. There's an old tape recorder here. Sure enough, sitting on the shelf beside the desk was a dusty cassette player. Adrian slid the tape inside. For a moment nothing happened. Then, click. Static filled the room. The sound of an old recording. Then two voices emerged. One of them I recognized instantly. My grandfather. The other. My father. The tape crackled. Then Grandpa spoke. Thomas, you need to calm down. My father's voice sounded younger. Panicked. I didn't mean for it to happen. My chest tightened. Grandpa sighed heavily. Tell me exactly what happened. There was a long pause on the tape. Then my father spoke again. I went to Samuel's office to get the transfer codes. Adrian's jaw clenched. My father continued. He caught me going through the files. My hands started shaking. The tape hissed. Then my father said something that made the air feel heavy. He grabbed me. Another pause. He said he was calling the police. Grandpa's voice came through the speakers. And then? My father whispered the next part. We struggled. In the basement, the real version of my father stared at the floor. The tape continued. He pushed me, or maybe I pushed him. I don't know. Static. Then the words that made my stomach drop. He fell backward. Adrian closed his eyes. The tape kept playing. There was this sound when his head hit the desk. Grandpa's voice became quiet. Was he breathing? My father answered after several seconds. No. The tape crackled again. And then Grandpa said something that chilled me. Listen carefully, Thomas. My father's voice trembled. What do I do? There was a long silence. Then Grandpa spoke. We can't call the police. Everyone in the basement froze. Even Adrian looked shocked. On the tape, my father sounded confused. What? Grandpa continued. If this becomes public, the company will collapse. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. My chest tightened. We have to protect the business. Adrian's eyes opened slowly. The tape continued. My father whispered. So what do we do? And then came the sentence that changed everything. Grandpa said quietly. We make it look like suicide. The tape stopped. Click. Silence filled the basement. No one spoke. No one moved. My mind was spinning. For years, I had thought my grandfather was the victim. The wise old man. The moral center of the family. But the tape told a different story. He had helped cover up a death. Adrian finally spoke. So he knew. Mercer nodded slowly. Yes. My father looked up suddenly. You see, he said desperately. It wasn't just me. But Adrian didn't look satisfied. Instead, he walked toward the desk. Toward the notebook. Something doesn't add up. I frowned. What do you mean? Adrian flipped through several pages. Harold spent 20 years collecting evidence against your father. Mercer nodded. That's clear. Adrian looked back at the tape recorder. But he was the one who told him to cover it up. The contradiction hung in the air. I felt a knot in my stomach. Why would Grandpa do that? Mercer closed the notebook slowly. Perhaps guilt. But Adrian shook his head. No. He pointed to the final pages of the notebook. Look at the dates. I stepped closer. The last entries were written just weeks ago. Grandpa had been investigating again. Digging into the past. Mercer read one line quietly. The truth must come out before I die. My heart skipped. Then Adrian flipped to the final page. There was only one sentence written there. Large. Underlined. Thomas is lying. The room went silent again. My father's head snapped up. What? Mercer frowned. That's strange. Adrian looked at my father carefully. The tape proves you were there. My father nodded quickly. Yes. Exactly. Adrian's eyes narrowed. But the notebook says you're lying. My pulse quickened. About what? Adrian slowly pointed to the tape recorder. About what really happened in that office. My father's face went pale again. That tape is the truth. Adrian shook his head slowly. No. Then he looked at me. Because there's another tape. My heart stopped. What? Adrian opened the metal box again. Inside were several more cassettes. He picked up one labeled Samuel, phone call, June 14, 2003. My breath caught. That's the night he died. Mercer looked intrigued. Adrian inserted the second tape into the recorder. My father took a step forward. Don't. But Adrian pressed the button. Click. Static filled the basement again. Then a phone rang on the recording. Samuel's voice answered. Hello? Another voice spoke. A voice that made my skin crawl. Because I recognized it instantly. My mother's voice. She sounded calm. Cold. Samuel, we need to talk. Every head in the basement turned toward her. She looked like the color had drained from her body. On the tape, Samuel sounded confused. Linda? Why are you calling me? My mother on the recording answered quietly. Because Thomas is about to come see you. The basement went completely still. Then she said the words that shattered everything. And he doesn't know I already took the money. I slowly turned toward my mother. Her lips trembled. And for the first time that night, she looked truly afraid. The tape recorder hummed quietly. But no one was listening to it anymore. Every eye in the basement had turned toward my mother. She stood near the door, pale and frozen, like someone who had just been caught in a lie too big to escape. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Mom, I whispered. She didn't answer. Adrian slowly turned off the recorder. Click. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. My father looked completely stunned. Linda, he said quietly. My mother's hands were shaking. You weren't supposed to hear that. Adrian let out a short, humorless laugh. 23 years of lies, he said. And that's the best explanation you have? My father turned to her, confusion and anger mixing on his face. You took the money? My mother closed her eyes. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she whispered the word that changed everything. Yes. The room exploded with voices. You what? My father shouted. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. You stole the 5 million? She shook her head slowly. No. Mercer frowned. Then what did you take? My mother looked up. Her eyes were wet now. All of it. The basement went completely still. Adrian stared at her. What do you mean all of it? She took a shaky breath. That deal your father and grandpa were working on. She looked at me. It wasn't 5 million. Mercer flipped quickly through the notebook again. That's impossible. The documents clearly state. They only reported 5 million. Mercer's eyes widened. My father looked completely lost. Linda, what are you talking about? My mother spoke slowly. Samuel and Harold were hiding money. Adrian frowned. From who? Taxes. Investors. Everyone. Mercer nodded slowly. That's not uncommon in certain firms. My mother continued. The real amount in that account wasn't 5 million. My chest tightened. How much was it? She looked directly at me. 23 million. The same number on the property list. The same number Mercer had shown me earlier. Adrian's voice dropped. You're saying the entire 23 million disappeared that night? She nodded. Yes. My father staggered backward. You told me it was 5. I lied. He stared at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. You let me believe I ruined everything for $5 million? My mother's voice cracked. You ruined everything long before that. The words cut through the room like glass. Adrian crossed his arms. So you took the money before Thomas even arrived at the office? She nodded slowly. Yes. Mercer rubbed his forehead. This is extraordinary. My mind was spinning. But if you took the money... I looked at my father. Then why did he try to steal it? My mother answered quietly. Because he didn't know it was already gone. My father's face twisted with anger. You set me up. No. You let me walk into that office. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know Samuel would confront you. Adrian stepped closer. My father called you before Thomas arrived. My mother nodded. Yes. And you warned him? Yes. My father looked like he might collapse. You could have stopped me. She whispered the truth. I wanted Samuel scared. The room went silent again. Adrian's eyes hardened. You wanted leverage. She didn't deny it. Yes. My stomach twisted. You planned this? No, she said quickly. Not like this. But Adrian didn't look convinced. My father ended up dead. My mother's voice broke. I never wanted that. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. All these years, he said quietly. You let me believe I was responsible. Her answer came softly. You were responsible. The tension in the basement felt unbearable. Then Mercer cleared his throat. There's still a question that needs answering. Everyone looked at him. If Linda stole the 23 million. He pointed toward the stack of property documents upstairs. How did it end up back in Thomas's hands? My mother wiped her face. I didn't keep the money. Adrian frowned. Then where did it go? She looked at my father. I used it. For what? My mother hesitated. Then she said the words that shocked us all again. To build everything we own. My father stared at her. Our houses? She nodded. The investments. Mercer slowly understood. You converted the stolen money into property assets. My mother nodded again. Over time. Adrian looked at the property list. That explains the shell companies. Mercer nodded. Yes. But then Mercer asked the question that had been building in my mind too. Why did Harold leave it all to Ethan? Everyone turned toward me again. My mother took a deep breath. Because Harold discovered the truth 3 weeks ago. My chest tightened. About you? She nodded. He knew I took the money. Adrian frowned. But he blamed Thomas for 20 years. Yes. Mercer flipped back to the last page of the notebook. The one that said Thomas is lying. He realized Thomas had been covering for you. My father looked stunned. What? My mother whispered something that made my heart twist. You always thought you killed Samuel. He nodded weakly. Yes. She shook her head. You didn't. The room went completely still. Adrian stepped forward slowly. Then how did my father die? My mother closed her eyes. And when she spoke again, her voice barely came out. The words seemed to echo in the basement. Because I pushed him first. For a moment, no one even breathed. The rain outside had stopped, but inside the house everything felt like it was collapsing. Adrian stared at my mother. You're lying. She slowly shook her head. No. My father's voice cracked. What do you mean you pushed him? My mother looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Like the weight of 20 years had finally caught up with her. That night, she said quietly, Samuel called me after I moved the money. Adrian's eyes narrowed. What did he want? He knew something was wrong. She took a shaky breath. He said the account numbers had changed. Mercer nodded slightly. That would happen if funds were transferred. My mother continued. He told me he was calling the police. Adrian clenched his fists. That sounds like him. She nodded. Yes. Then she looked at my father. I panicked. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of the basement lights. So I drove to the office. My heart was pounding. You got there before Dad? Yes. She looked at the floor as she spoke. Samuel was waiting. Adrian stepped closer. What happened? My mother's voice was barely steady. He was furious. The memory clearly still haunted her. He started shouting, asking where the money was. My father whispered. And you told him? She shook her head. No. Adrian spoke coldly. So what did you do? My mother closed her eyes for a moment. We argued. Her hands trembled. He grabbed my arm. Adrian's jaw tightened. And then? My mother's voice dropped to a whisper. I pushed him away. No one moved. He stumbled. She swallowed hard. And his head hit the desk. Adrian looked frozen. The same desk from the tape. She nodded slowly. Yes. My father stared at her. You let me believe I did it. Her eyes filled with tears. When Thomas arrived, Samuel was already dead. The basement felt colder than before. My father whispered. You watched me panic. I didn't know what else to do. My father laughed bitterly. So you let me confess to Harold. Her voice broke. I thought he would tell the police. Adrian looked toward Mercer. And instead he covered it up. Mercer nodded grimly. Yes. My father rubbed his face. So all those years. He looked at my mother with disbelief. I thought I was the reason Samuel died. My mother whispered something that felt like it broke the last piece of the truth. You weren't innocent. My father looked up sharply. What? You went there to steal the money. Adrian's eyes darkened. And my father confronted you. My father nodded slowly. Yes. But he was already dead. The realization settled over the room. For 23 years, everyone had believed the wrong story. The man who thought he was a killer wasn't. The woman who claimed to protect the family was the one who caused the death. Adrian stepped back, absorbing it all. My father died because you stole money and lost control. My mother didn't argue. Yes. Silence followed. Then Adrian looked at me. And now you own everything that came from that money. I felt sick. That wasn't my choice. Mercer spoke calmly. Legally, Harold transferred all assets to Ethan. Adrian nodded slowly. Harold knew the truth. Yes, Mercer said. He wrote the final entry after hearing the second tape. My father frowned. Second tape? Mercer held up the cassette we had just played. That call between Linda and Samuel. My mother nodded. He confronted me 3 weeks ago. My chest tightened. Grandpa knew? Yes. And he still didn't go to the police? My mother shook her head. No. Adrian asked quietly. Why? Mercer answered. Because the statute of limitations for financial crimes had passed. Adrian frowned. But not for murder. Mercer nodded. Correct. Everyone looked at my mother. She looked exhausted. Harold said something before he died. My heart skipped. What? She looked at me. He said the truth should destroy the right person. Adrian crossed his arms. And who did he mean? My mother whispered the answer. Me. The basement was silent again. Then Mercer spoke carefully. There's still one more matter. Everyone turned toward him. The will. Adrian frowned. What about it? Mercer opened the notebook again. Harold didn't just leave the properties to Ethan. My stomach tightened. What else is there? Mercer flipped to the inside cover, where a folded piece of paper had been taped. He removed it slowly. This appears to be an instruction letter. My heart was racing. He read it aloud. Ethan, if you are hearing this truth, you must decide what happens next. Adrian looked at me. Mercer continued reading. The money that built those properties was stolen. My chest felt heavy. It caused a man's death. Adrian's eyes never left me. Then Mercer read the final line. The line that made everything clear. So the inheritance is not yours to keep, unless you believe it should be. The basement felt completely silent. For the first time that night, every decision was in my hands. Adrian spoke quietly. So what are you going to do with $23 million? I looked at my father. Then my mother. Then Adrian. And I realized something that none of them had expected. Grandpa hadn't left me money. He had left me a choice. And whatever I decided next would finally end a story that had been poisoning our lives for 23 years. No one spoke. The basement felt like a courtroom, and somehow I had become the judge. Mercer still held the letter from my grandfather. Adrian watched me closely. My parents stood on opposite sides of the room like strangers. And all of them were waiting for the same thing. My decision. I stared at the stack of documents on the desk. $23 million. Houses. Apartments. Land. All built from stolen money. All tied to a man's death. For years I had believed my family was normal. Flawed, maybe. But normal. Now it felt like I had just discovered an entire hidden history buried under our lives. Adrian finally broke the silence. So, he said quietly. What happens now? I looked at him. You want the money. He didn't hesitate. It belonged to my father. Mercer spoke carefully. Legally, the assets belong to Ethan now. Adrian shrugged slightly. Legal and moral are not always the same thing. I couldn't argue with that. My father suddenly stepped forward. Ethan, listen to me. I looked at him. He looked older than he had just a few hours ago. Tired. Broken. That money built everything we have, he said. Our home. Your education. Our lives. My mother said nothing. She simply stared at the floor. Dad continued. If you give it away, everything we built disappears. Adrian's voice was cold. Everything you built from stolen money. My father snapped back. You think you're innocent? Your father was hiding millions too. Adrian didn't deny it. Yes. The room went quiet again. My father let out a frustrated laugh. So everyone here is guilty. Mercer cleared his throat. That may be true. He looked at me. But only one person here didn't participate in it. Everyone's eyes returned to me again. I felt the weight of that truth. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't pushed anyone. I hadn't covered up a death. Yet somehow, the consequences had landed in my hands. I thought about my grandfather. The man who had carried the secret for 23 years. Why had he given the final decision to me? Then I remembered the last line of his letter. The truth should destroy the right person. I looked at my mother. She still hadn't looked up. Mom, I said quietly. Her shoulders tensed. Yes? Why didn't you tell the truth? Her voice came out fragile. Because I was afraid. Of prison? She shook her head. No. Then what? She finally looked at me. And the sadness in her eyes was deeper than I had ever seen. I was afraid of losing you. My chest tightened. You thought I would hate you. Yes. I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I felt. Adrian stepped closer to the desk. My father never got justice. My father spoke quietly. And neither did Samuel. Adrian looked at him sharply. You don't get to say his name. But Dad didn't argue. He just nodded. You're right. Mercer closed the notebook. This situation has only 3 possible outcomes. We all looked at him. First, Ethan keeps everything. Adrian frowned. Second, the assets are returned to Samuel Vance's family. Adrian's eyes flickered. And the third? Mercer's voice was calm. The money is given up entirely. My heart skipped. What do you mean? A public confession, Mercer explained. The assets surrendered to the state. My father's face turned pale. That would destroy us. Mercer nodded. Yes. I looked around the room. My father. A man who had lived with guilt for 23 years. My mother. A woman who had buried the truth for just as long. Adrian. A man who had grown up believing his father was betrayed. 3 lives shaped by the same night. Then I finally spoke. I'm not keeping the money. My father closed his eyes. Adrian looked surprised. What does that mean? I picked up the property list. These assets came from stolen money. No one argued. So they shouldn't belong to me. Adrian stepped closer. You're giving them back? I looked at him. Not to you. His expression hardened. Why not? Because your father wasn't innocent either. Adrian didn't deny it. So what happens to it? I placed the papers back on the desk. We sell everything. Everyone stared at me. All 23 million. My father looked shocked. And then? I took a slow breath. Half goes to Samuel Vance's family. Adrian blinked. And the other half? I looked at my parents. To the families of every employee who lost their jobs when the company collapsed. The room went silent. Mercer slowly nodded. That would close the entire matter. Adrian looked at me for a long moment. Then he said something I didn't expect. My father would have respected that. My father looked like he was struggling to process everything. And us? He asked quietly. I looked at him. You live with the truth. My mother began crying softly. For the first time that night, Adrian didn't look angry. Just tired. Mercer packed the documents back into his briefcase. Well, he said calmly. Harold always believed Ethan would make the right choice. I felt something strange in my chest. Not relief. But closure. The storm outside had stopped completely. And as we walked upstairs, I realized something important. My grandfather hadn't left me $23 million. He had left me something far more difficult. The chance to end a lie that had lasted 23 years. And finally, the truth was no longer buried.